Okay, so let's start. I'll start by saying hello to everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to our first event for this Climate Week 2020. This year we're doing things a little differently. We're celebrating digitally, and it's so important that we continue to celebrate Climate Week to showcase the work being done to tackle the climate crisis. With that being said, I'm delighted to welcome you to this Biodiversity and Climate Change webinar. Hosted by Marine Alliance Scotland, Marine Alliance for Science and Technology for Scotland, or MASTS. MASTS is a community of organisations engaged in marine science. They represent the majority of Scotland's research capacity for marine research. They are a unique collaboration between marine research, organisations, government and industry, and they work to facilitate better communication, collaboration and coordination within the marine community, whilst ensuring that Scottish marine science receives the recognition that it deserves. So just before we start, I'd like to say a big thank you to MASS for hosting this event and organising it for us, and for facilitating our fantastic speakers who you'll be listening to today. So first up, we have Chris Leaky from People, Ocean, Planet, speaking on behaviour change and how this can be used as a catalyst for climate policy. He will be followed by Catherine Gemmell, a Marine Conservation Officer, who will be speaking on ocean recovery, sustainable seafood and the importance of clean seas. And finishing, we will have Celeste Kellock speaking on her research within blue carbon. So just a quick note, this session will be recorded. If you would like to ask one of our speakers a question, please use the Q&A feature within Zoom, or if you're watching from YouTube, please use the comment section below. So now that we've got the introductions out of the way, let's get straight to the webinar. So our first speaker is Chris Leaky.
Hi everybody, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. How's that? Is that visible? Yes?
Yep, you're good to go.
Great. Thank you. Well, hello everybody, and thank you for having me here. It's great to be here today. And before I get started properly, I'm just going to do a quick poll. Hannah will put this up on your screen. We're just really keen to get an idea of who's tuned in today and what kind of areas you work in, and in particular who does or doesn't work directly on environment or climate issues. That would be great. So spend a moment clicking your buttons.
Yeah, if you're joining us through YouTube, I'm sorry that you can't actually do this feature. So, but you're more than welcome to do a shout out in the YouTube chat box if you want to say where you're joining us from. So you have a few more seconds to click the appropriate answer for you guys. Okay, can you see the results, Chris?
I can, thank you very much. So that's just interesting to see. So obviously most people that are tuned in today work in fields around environment and energy, perhaps some in marine itself. But we do have some folk who are tuning in from perhaps digital or justice and legal departments as well. So that's good to know. We've kind of got that reach to some degree. Okay, let me close that and let's move on. So I'm just going to start with just a very expansion to the introduction you've already had to MASTS. So the Marine Alliance for Science and Technology for Scotland is essentially and first and foremost a research pool, enabling collaboration, coordination and impact across the marine sciences and technology. We have 17 member institutions, mostly universities, but also public bodies and working closely with government. And MASTS does also represent Scottish marine science at an international level, for example, with the European Marine Board. We organise our work under 3 themes, and these are they, and these do map to government strategy as well. And under these themes, we have 12 research forums. You can read about all of them on our website if you're interested, and they all to some degree touch on issues of climate change, but particularly these 3. Not surprisingly, the Marine Climate Change Forum, Marine Renewable Energy, and the Coastal Forum. What I'm really going to be talking to you about now is about a new initiative that MASTS is embarking on called People, Ocean, Planet, or POP. And it's all about extending the role of marine science and scientists collaborating to drive change in the human behaviours that underpin big challenges for the ocean environment. Today, I'll place that in the context of climate change and draw attention to the role of behavioural change and therefore social change in a policy context. We have a new website with quite a new initiative, and we've also just at the end of that last week embarked on social media. So if you're on Twitter, please click, join us and help us raise our profile as we try to expand our activities. So I'm not going to talk at length about how climate change impacts the ocean or about how incredibly important ocean health is for both mitigating and adapting to climate change. The bottom line there really being that the capacity for mitigation and adaptation, whether you view it from a people or a nature perspective, is vastly limited if ocean health is poor. So our marine environment might well be out of sight sometimes, but we do need to keep it in mind. And so it's a good thing that we have lots of ambition and good policies. And in Scotland, for the most part, we take a leading role in many of these, and the science community helps with that, with policy development and implementation and working with industry, for example. But let's not kid ourselves. We are most certainly past the point of being able to prevent climate change. This is to a large degree now about damage limitation and recovery. And while it's perhaps unfair to call it snail's pace, we do need to accelerate, albeit having an eye to the just transition. Of course, that is important socially and economically. So what other levers do we have? Well, behavioural change is one of them. Scottish Government, the NGOs and many others already do lots of work on behavioural change, and many more contribute to it, perhaps without necessarily recognising it in that context. What POP is about is seeking to empower the marine science community to join this party more fully, providing an ambition, a framework, and a vehicle to increase our contribution and impact in a way that accelerates us towards these kind of policy goals. But the practice of behavioural change is a tricky one and has some common accusations thrown at it, like we need systemic change, or it's the governments and corporations that have to change. But for me, this fails to recognise that behavioural change is not just about individuals or even the cumulative impact of individuals, but about how society at large influences systems of governance and business. So behavioural change in society leads to shifts in social norms, giving governments the social licence they need to enable more and faster change. Similarly, businesses respond to their consumers, their customers, enabling more and faster change. And governments respond to corporations that show sustainability leadership. This is not new by any stretch of the imagination, but I do find this framing quite useful when challenged on what is the role of behavioural change and why are you telling people to behave differently. So this is our mantra, is to motivate, to socialize, and to ease the change, and to do so at all levels in society. Through this, we want to bridge the gaps to knowledge, but also on to optimism, and from good intentions to action. The social dimension here is particularly important and interesting because just as the environment has tipping points, so does society, and they can be good or bad. Some studies have tried to put a number on it. So one study calls it the 25% rule, but essentially what we're saying is that visible changes in a relatively small portion of a group or population can influence perceived social norms and trigger positive tipping points in society. Any psychologist or sociologist will tell you that humans are not rational beings. We generally vastly underestimate how much our decisions and actions are influenced by those around us. We've set out 4 initial priorities for our work, and each of these is very much an issue in its own right. So we're not just about climate change, but these other issues do intersect with climate change. They are exacerbated by or complicated by climate change to some degree. For seafood sustainability, physical and biological changes to climate present new challenges for sustainability. How do we fish sustainably if the location, the number, and the species of fish is changing, perhaps due to water temperature or ocean acidification, tongue twister. Then making sure fishing activity doesn't damage blue carbon habitats. So those habitats that are important for capturing or storing carbon. And so fisher behaviour becomes important. Then there's us as consumers. We also need to be thinking more about low carbon diets. Where is seafood in that picture, and how does that sit with other aspects of sustainability? Regarding pollution from land, for example, farming and land management practices, which you can also see as farmer and land manager behaviours, determine loss of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers to water systems and onto the sea. Nutrient runoff in particular intersects with climate change, as higher nutrient concentrations can combine with higher temperatures in the water, causing algal blooms, or in a worst case scenario, deoxygenated coastal waters. And there are areas in the world where that is a growing issue at the mouths of some major rivers. And then again, consumer behaviour obviously has a part to play here, and we perhaps don't always recognise that ostensibly land-based schemes are also relevant to the sea. Deep sea mining is one that's less in the public consciousness, and particularly the links between the mineral sought and our daily lives, the elements that can be acquired from the deep sea that could be used in our electronics, our electricals, our computers, the phones we now all have by our sides the whole time. As terrestrial supplies go down and demand goes up for this sort of stuff, the metals and the rare earth elements, for example, this is an industry that's on the verge of massive expansion. And this map indicates the scale of the geographic ambition. But it doesn't need to be. E-waste, electronic waste, is the fastest growing waste stream. And in Europe, only 1/5 of e-waste is getting recycled at the moment. So through changes to consumer behaviour linked to better supply chains and the circular economy, perhaps some innovations in metal recovery during recycling, we can reduce demand for virgin minerals from the deep sea, and with that reduce emissions, not just from the ships, but also from smelting operations. Smelting of ore actually has a spectacularly high emissions associated with it. And again, we can avoid some of the impact on seabed habitats, which have that blue carbon potential. And we can actively map behavioural change actions to policy areas like this. And in reality, these big strategic policies are achieved through a more complex or more specific policy areas, which some of you are probably involved in. This is just a sample, really, of a handful of them. I've not done this comprehensively. This is just illustrative, but you can quickly show quite a complex picture when you start trying to map things across and reveal really that policy areas not obviously related to the marine environment become very relevant. You'll notice I haven't drawn any lines to education and learning, and frankly that's because all lines should go there. We advocate knowledge and empathy being at the heart of behavioural change. So if that's your area of work, I imagine and hope you're very busy. And bearing all this in mind, we've organised our ideas, our proposals and our projects under 3 themes. Beyond knowledge, first of all, is where we want to do science communication in a more exciting, memorable way. So, for example, interactive and immersive learning, working with the creative industries and finding new audiences and platforms. So, for example, even in these early stages, we're working on museum exhibitions, artist residencies, and developing e-games. People power is where we want to put the information and the tools in people's hands, but also place them in empowering contexts to help them turn their good intentions to action. That might be about simple guides or finding new levers for social norms and social identities, or peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. One of the things we're looking at the moment is better use of citizen science, taking knowledge and learning into a social context. Better business is where we want to help businesses make more sustainable supply chains and help them make the right choices easier for customers. So, for example, using tech for good, improving data for supply chain transparency, and perhaps moving towards incentives and reward schemes. So across these areas, we are developing new projects, finding new partnerships, and trying to add value to work that others are already doing, but also just providing a framework for connecting marine science to behavioural change outcomes. As we take this forward, we've got an eye to COP next year, but also to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. At the bottom of the page, you can see our founding partners, to whom we're very grateful. And in the middle, just some key messages to leave you with, and I'll leave those up as we move into Q&A now. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Chris. Really interesting talk. So we had one question from Grant Campbell, and he says, very interesting talk regarding POP priorities, and in principle this seems like a really good way to increase and enhance science and the relationships with policymakers. Just wondering where effective marine spatial planning fits into this. Is this an umbrella across all 4 themes: climate change, seafood sustainability, deep sea mining and pollution from land? I have no doubt that we should be moving to a multifaceted disciplinary approach, but I'm keen and curious to know where MSP fits in here. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a good question, and I don't know if Grant knows this, may or may not know this, but in previous jobs I've been very involved in marine spatial planning, so hopefully I'm qualified to answer that. Yeah, marine spatial planning is different people have different views on what it's all about, I suppose, and I see it as being potentially very cross-cutting. So I think you're right, it can be an umbrella across all 4 themes. And I suppose it's worth reflecting on the fact that marine planning, and particularly at finer scales like in Scotland with the regional marine planning, there's increasing expectation that that is a participatory process for the public, and so behaviour change and raising kind of knowledge and awareness of these issues across society can only help with public participation, and making sure that public participation is from an informed place. So yes, I would hope that MSP can fit across all of these things.
Excellent. Well, we got the right person for the presentation here if you had experience of marine spatial planning, so that was fortunate. We don't have any questions on YouTube, so I think that's everything. If anybody had any last questions, if you could put them into the Q&A box just now. But I think that's us.
Great, thanks, Chris. So next we have Catherine Gemmell, who is going to be speaking to us about her work and the importance of keeping the seas clean. Catherine, if you're here.
Hello, thanks so much, Leah.
Hi.
So I work for the Marine Conservation Society, so we're a UK-wide charity, and a lot of my work is around being on the beach and removing the litter that's from the beach and trying to be putting in place preventative measures to stop it getting there in the first place. And what's great to see is over the last 5 years that I've been working on this is all of the dots being joined up. Why are we talking about this in Climate Week? Because we know a lot of the stuff we're finding on the beach is single-use plastic, so the emissions and the resources that are being used to make items that are used once and thrown away is all kind of feeding into this idea of overconsumption and the damage that we're doing to our planet. And the picture here was one I just took from a beach across at North Berwick last week. And sadly, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. But I think because of what 2020 has thrown at us, we're seeing a whole kind of new plastic tide being thrown up on our shores. So what actions can we all be taking to reduce this, to stop it and prevent it happening? And to link that all into the climate crisis, into the biodiversity crisis, into the ocean crisis, so we can actually take action. Many of you might have watched the documentary last night by Sir David Attenborough on Extinction, the Facts, and I think that really did bring it home to me and to a lot of my colleagues about what is happening. So hopefully a lot of people have woken up very inspired and driven today to keep doing what we're doing so we can then save our planet from these crises that we're facing. But before going too much into the doom and gloom, of course, anyone who knows me, I am very much an ocean optimist. I am very optimistic about the future. And I think the way we're going to do it is by reconnecting everyone back to the ocean. And 2020 is the designated year of Scotland's coasts and waters. So I just want everyone to take a little bit of time to remember why we're in this fight, why we're protecting the sea, why we're making all these connections from climate to the ocean, so we can actually carry on doing what we're doing. And of course, this webinar is linking to biodiversity, so the amazing creatures that we've got on our ocean around the UK. We've got over 20,000 recorded species, which just still blows my mind every time that I'm saying it. And I want you to take a wee second, and we're going to launch a little poll here, not a poll, sorry, in the chat, or if you're on YouTube, put in the comments, or share on social media, use the hashtag. What is your favourite marine animal? If you had to choose one, what would it be? And I do this exercise with everybody, from the little ones that I do things with nursery, all the way up to webinars like this with yourselves, because I think it's so important to remind ourselves why we're doing this. What do we love about the sea? Because I think if people don't fall in love with it, we can't expect them to take action to protect that. And that could be everything from a young person to somebody working in NGO to someone working in government and developing policy. They've got to be passionate and believe in what they're doing. And I can see some brilliant responses coming in here, from octopus to seahorse, cetaceans. I love it. Let's just go for a whole family. Seals, crabs, all of them. Brilliant. Hermit crabs are one of my favorite things, and I still get excited looking out for them as well. So ask these questions with everyone that you're seeing. Just get people to chat about the sea, and then we can start talking to them. What's happening to the sea? What crisis is it facing? And what actions can we then be taking to protect it? There we go, just a bit stuck there. So as MCS, we kind of have three main areas that we work on, and they tie in really closely to the themes that Chris was speaking about, which is fantastic. And I know that there's going to be a lot of cross work going on there. Our first theme is around ocean recovery. So this is very much focused on biodiversity. It's about protecting species and protecting habitats, but also, as we know now, it's about recovering them as well. We know that the damage has been done. We know it's continuing to be done. So what can we claim back and how can we help the ocean recover? So in here, we've got an amazing team who are working on making sure that we've got a well-managed network of marine protected areas around Scotland, around the UK, and we've even got a team working on our UK overseas territories as well. It's also about looking at the huge role the ocean does play in influence our climate. And I know Celeste is going to be talking a bit about this, but it is about the importance of blue carbon, and it's important of our habitats, from our seabed to our seagrass to our kelp forests, all these amazing things that our ocean does for us and helps protect our planet. So what can we do to recover it and keep going? The next area of work is around responsible seafood. So I'm going to launch a quick poll first to Hannah, if you wouldn't mind. And if you're on YouTube, again, feel free to answer in the comments or even pop on Twitter, which I'll catch up afterwards, is, have you heard of the Good Fish Guide? So this is one of the main outputs from our fisheries and our aquaculture team. And it's all about asking people who choose to eat seafood that they use the Good Fish Guide to make the most sustainable, the most responsible choice. So basically, our amazing team, they're doing it right at the moment, is taking in all the latest science to then look at how our stocks are doing, how our fish is being farmed, where it's coming from, to give it a rating from 1 to 5. So if it comes out as a 1 or a 2, it's in the green. That means it's doing really well. We say that's a good choice. If it's a 3 or a 4, it means it's probably not doing so well. It's probably in the amber. So we're like, maybe just eat on occasion. Or if it comes out as a 5, we then do say it's in the red list, it's a fish to avoid. And that's brilliant to see. I can see on the poll that we've got 68% of you have heard of it. That's amazing. So if you haven't heard of it, please do check it out and encourage people to use it who do then use or choose to eat seafood as part of their diet. And it's a bit like what Chris was saying, it's about encouraging behaviour change, but also at every level, because the research that goes into this is also then used to help with good fisheries management and good aquaculture management, as well as then looking right up at the top at policy and at legislation as well. And then our last area of work is around clean seas and beaches, which is where I do most of my work. There we go. So beautiful, clean beach there for crossing East Lothian. And this is where I've been concentrating in Scotland for the last couple of years. And this has done everything from around different items of marine litter that we're finding to we now are looking at the chemical impact that we're having on our oceans and what we can be doing to reduce the amount of chemicals that are going into it and the adverse effects it is having on our biodiversity and the way that our ocean is working. So sadly, or in a good way, I probably don't have to spend too much time on the impact of especially marine litter on our oceans. But I always pull up these two tweets because I think they really do just bring home the fact that it's not just happening far away. Blue Planet 2, Sky Ocean Rescue, we're seeing all of these big news corporations covering these stories now, but it can sometimes still feel a little bit far away. But these are two from right here in Scotland. So we've got a minke whale that's also sadly been entangled in a fishing net. And then we've got a gull pellet that's been regurgitated that is showing plastic nurdles, so these tiny little plastic pellets, plastic cotton bud sticks, and even a balloon as well. And sometimes, as well as being optimistic and getting people to fall in love with the ocean, it's also reminding them that this is happening to the sea creatures on our doorstep. These are happening to our home wildlife. So again, it's inspiring from different angles for people to take action and take part. And sadly, we're seeing a lot more of this. So a lot of these photos were actually taken from my first trip to the beach post-lockdown. I think that was about 4.5 months. It's the longest I've ever been without being next to the sea. So we do need to be looking at a green, blue recovery. We need to be looking at what changes are even happening right now and the reliance on single use. And what can we be doing to ensure that we're not seeing scenes like this and the impacts it will have on biodiversity and on our ocean and the wider climate crisis. There's something you can do starting this Friday. So we've got our Great British Beach Clean starting this Friday the 18th. And for the first time, it's running for over a week. Because it's obviously going to look very different this year. Most of the time we have hundreds of volunteers going out to do mass beach cleans, and as well as removing all the litter, you'll see in the background of the picture a survey form. So they're collecting data on all the important items that they're finding on the beach. So this goes back to what Chris was saying about the importance of citizen science or community science, the fact that anybody can go out and help collect this important data, send it into us, and this is what we use then for our campaign work, for our advocacy work, and sharing it with as many people as possible to get those prevention things we were talking about at the beginning. How do we prevent all of these emissions? How do we prevent all these resources being used for something that's just going to end up impacting our ocean in a negative way? But don't worry if you don't live next to the coast, because we're also launching our Source to Sea litter quest. So there's going to be this kind of bingo card where you can just go out and do a litter pick wherever you are to have a look for these different kind of top items that we find on the beach that we want to connect to the terrestrial side, to that kind of that land to sea connection, and ensuring that everybody realizes we've all got a part to play. So I'm going to launch another poll here because I'm just interested to see if everyone's experience has been the same as me. Anyone else seeing littered PPE recently? So personal protective equipment, from single-use masks, single-use gloves. You saw my pictures earlier on, and we're also looking for them on the Source to Sea litter quest as well. People have been seeing quite a lot, even just on the walks in the parks and on the pavements right next to me. I'm seeing quite a few. Some people are seeing a little. Interestingly, no one's not seen any. So again, I think that's quite telling. So it looks like yes, a little is the most popular one, but this is what we want to gather information for from this Friday through to next Friday, the 25th. Let's get a proper snapshot about what's actually happening so we can help raise awareness and then start to look at solutions to reducing this problem as well. So thanks very much for taking part in that. So what do we actually do with the data? So our amazing Beachwatch team take it all in and analyse it so we can produce a report each year. So these infographics are from last year's 2019 report. And this is where we can start to break it down by country to look at how we're doing. Initially, you're like, that's great. It all looks to be going down. If you actually have a look to see it, the number of items we're still finding for every 100 metres of beach surveyed is crazy. 492 items per 100 metres of beach in Scotland. That's how much we're still finding. So we know we still have a lot of work to do. We can also then break it down further into individual items. So we can produce our top 10 that you can see here. So we can see, is there a particular item that's consistently up there or is maybe moving rapidly up that top 10 that we need to look at? Is it a behaviour change campaign? Do we need to be working with a certain sector or industry, or do we need to come up with a policy prevention measure? So we can look at the sources of where this litter is coming from to have a look at who we should be working with or where we should be focusing our effort, and then making these items disappear from the top 10 and hopefully from our beaches completely. And I think, as we all know, anyone who works in the environment and especially in the ocean, is we only have one ocean. It's all connected. So what's brilliant about taking part in the Great British Beach Clean is it's not just having impact in Scotland and in the UK. We send all of that data to the US-based Ocean Conservancy as part of the International Coastal Cleanup. So that data can have impact from local to national to UK to global. And you'll see here, we got a little Scottish tweet in the report that just came out last week. So Scotland is firmly on that global map on taking action on how to tackle marine litter and gathering the important data that we need for it. And to end on some optimism, let's share some of the successes that this data has had. So the data helped secure the carrier bag charges across the UK, and as well as helping with the consultation process and the campaigning for it, our data can now report how well that policy is doing. So you've seen a 65% decrease in bags on beaches since the first charge was put in place, which is absolutely incredible and a really important driver for both our volunteers and for the policymakers to see that these policy decisions are working. So we need to see what else we can then implement to have the same kind of success. In Scotland, we worked really closely with our friends over at FIDRA to work with the Scottish Government to ban single-use bags. Here are just a few photos. Some environmental champions might recognise the one in the top right. That was from a beach clean we did together down at Silvernose a couple of years ago. So this obviously just came into effect last year. So we now want to have a look at this year's data and the coming years to see if we start to see these items going down following that new legislation coming into place. And one that we'll definitely be looking out for is the upcoming deposit return scheme. So volunteers have been finding bottles and cans of every material for years. And it was great to be working with Have You Got the Bottle to bring that deposit return system to the forefront of the conversation. And brilliant that Scottish Government have committed to bringing that in. And it's all the important part that a circular economy can play. Again, linking back to climate week, the role of a circular economy in bringing down our emissions, using our resources carefully, and encouraging reuse, recycling over single use. And of course, because it's MASTS, and I know that we've got a big science community out there, I just want to do a shout out to say that our data is available for anybody and everybody who wants to use it. So here are a couple of papers that have been led by Dr. Bill Turrell from Marine Scotland Science, who we share our data with every year. So if there's anybody out there who thinks that our data set would be of use to their work, please do not hesitate to get in touch, because the more it can be used, the more awareness we'll have and the more change we'll get quicker. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I hope that was interesting, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was fantastic, super interesting as ever. We have one question on the Q&A chat here from Debbie. So she says, thanks, this has been really interesting. With the average number of items found per 100 meters, how long was the timeline of the statistics? Over a week or a month, etc.?
No, brilliant. Thanks, Debbie. So our Great British Beach Clean is normally over 4 days. It's the third weekend in September. This year is the first year that we're running it over a week. And that's just to allow for the new guidelines that have come into place to give people more time to get out there and tackle beaches when they're not going to have 40, 50, 100 volunteers to help clear them. But all of our data so far from our Great British Beach Clean reports is based on that 4-day weekend over the last over 25 years now is the length of the data set.
That's quite mind-boggling. 25 years of data.
I know.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So having taken part in some of these beach cleans previously with yourself, Catherine, they're quite, yeah, they're pretty intense. The information that gathered is quite exhaustive, but obviously that's all very valuable data that's going to direct to policymakers and helping to enact things like, as you say, the plastic bag levy, which has had real impact.
Exactly.
Fantastic. I don't see any questions on YouTube. Any other last questions from folk? You can put them in the Q&A chat. We've got some comments about how interesting the talk was as well, of course, which was fantastic. Thanks so much, Catherine.
Thanks at all. Thanks, everyone.
So next up we have Celeste Kellock, who's going to tell us about her research within blue carbon.
I'll just share my screen with you all now. Fantastic. Can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Hi, I'm Celeste Kellock, and I'm here to speak to you today about my PhD project, which is Source to Sea. So it's great to see that term already mentioned in our talks today. I'm based at the University of Stirling, and my supervisory and advisory teams span across the University of Stirling, the University of St Andrews, and Forest Research as well. And I'm also part of the Blue Carbon Forum. So I'll give you a brief introduction to my topic, what I research, why I research it, whereabout my study sites are, and I'll round it up with a summary at the end there for you. So to introduce my topic, it's source to sea, but specifically source to sea loss, and I look at soil carbon that is transported from forested environments to coastal waters and sediments. So I'm looking at where the carbon has come from in the environment, the source, and where it ends up in the sealock waters and in the sealock sediments. So why specifically am I looking at forested environments and the materials that might come out of forested environments? Well, over the last 100 years, Scotland has increased its forest cover from 5% to about 19%. So that's actually a relatively large increase in afforestation over a relatively short timescale. And this project essentially builds on research which has already been conducted showing that Scottish sea lochs are incredibly efficient carbon stores. And when people have taken sediment cores from the bottom of our Scottish sea lochs, they have noticed that there is a large percentage of terrestrial carbon in these sediment cores. So we know that what we're doing on land and our processes on land are feeding into what drains into our waters and may eventually be buried in our sediments. So the real kind of active question is, we know that when you fell trees that there is a release of carbon. But where does this carbon go? Is it released into the atmosphere? Is it contributing to our atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations? Or is it being transported throughout the environment laterally? Is it entering our waterways, and is it flowing into our sea lochs? And if it is being transported, how is that happening? What is facilitating that transport? So the two main things I'm really looking at in my project is carbon and iron. So carbon is existing in the forests, in the trees, in the soils, and in the vegetation. But when this vegetation degrades, it can degrade into CO2, and that can contribute towards our atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations and also ocean acidification in a longer term perspective as well. However, we do know that when carbon is bound to iron, it is preserved. It does not degrade into CO2. Iron and carbon have this binding mechanism, and it creates this mutual preservation for both elements, which is fantastic. That's kind of what we want to see. So we've essentially noticed that if you find iron and carbon together in sediments, then it creates a more efficient carbon burial scenario. So there was some key research in 2012 by Lalonde et al., which was really pivotal in this area, that showed that 20% of all organic carbon in marine sediments was bound to iron. That's a fifth of all organic carbon in marine sediments bound to iron. So we know that iron can facilitate carbon transport, but not only that, carbon burial, which is key to essentially making sure that this carbon doesn't end up in our atmospheres, and it's a great natural carbon store. But what is still unclear is how the binding mechanisms between iron and carbon work. A lot more research needs to be done in that area, and that is something I hope to be contributing to through my PhD. So why am I doing this? Why am I dedicating 4 years of my life to this project and this research? And why do I think other people such as yourselves should show an interest in it as well? This project is really all about connecting carbon. There are various different carbon pools throughout the environment. Carbon is stored in trees, in soils, in water, and in sediments. And it's really looking at this lateral transport between these pools. A lot of research focuses on vertical carbon transport, so that's carbon exchanging between forests in the atmosphere, soils in the atmosphere, oceans in the atmosphere. But often what's kind of overlooked is this lateral transport and how much carbon can actually be transported through our waterways and potentially into our coastal sediments. So we know from previous research that in peatlands, which are very iron rich, that the carbon and iron binding can facilitate this lateral transport. Forested environments have slightly less iron than peatlands, so we're wondering if we see those same trends. When people have taken sediment cores from the bottom of sea lochs and they've measured the concentration of carbon all the way down the sediments, there's various spikes of carbon at different points in time. And we're essentially wondering whether those could be related to afforestation or deforestation events that have happened throughout time. So what influence does forestry have on our coastal carbon storage there? In terms of how much we know about how carbon is transported and stored, there's still a lack of understanding there, essentially. We know a lot more about how carbon is stored in forests or in trees or in soils, so it's an area of active research that I'm contributing to just now. Not only does this project provide the opportunity to connect these different carbon pools together, but I really believe that this project has the opportunity to connect scientific research to land management and public engagement and policy. The results from this project will not only help us understand carbon and iron interactions and carbon transport, but in a more practical sense, it can help us optimise coastal carbon storage potentially, and also establish the best place to plant forestry for a positive environmental impact. Now, Scotland is known as a carbon nation, and for a long time this has been because we have vast areas of peatlands up north, and these are some of the largest carbon stores in Europe. But more recently, we've found that sea lochs also contribute to this. Sea lochs per unit area actually store more carbon than a peatland does. So we are a far bigger carbon nation than we potentially originally thought, and sea lochs are integral to this. So understanding the influence of land and the influence of human impact on what goes into these sea lochs really is vital. we've learned from past experience. We've planted forests on peatlands before. That hasn't worked out so well. It had a very detrimental effect in terms of carbon storage and has actually resulted in some carbon loss long term. And this has also been found in some areas of heathland as well, where we've planted forests and realised actually, if we hadn't planted them, the heathland would have sequestered more carbon by itself. So as we plant a forest more of Scotland, it's wise to look at the best places to plant forestry. And is Sealock catchment the best place to do that or not? It's a conversation that this research can open, and we can hopefully connect with land management and landowners about this as well. So how does this fit in with Scotland's national goals and strategies? Well, in 2019, Scotland updated its Climate Change Act and set some very ambitious goals to become a net zero society by 2045, so that's net zero emissions. And Scotland have really put themselves in this position where they've shown that they want to lead the way on climate change research and understanding and resilience. But to do that, not only do we need to know how much we're emitting and how we can change emissions, but we need to know how much our environment naturally stores, its natural capacity, and whether there's anything we can do to enable and optimise that. So in 2019, Scotland also released a new forestry strategy, and that's for the next decade, so 2019 to 2029. And it basically highlighted their ambition to plant more forests throughout Scotland, be that coniferous forestry and deciduous woodland as well. So this research is very timely. It fits directly into this new forestry strategy, and we're wanting to plant a lot more trees, and this research can really enable us to figure out the best places to potentially do that. In 2017, Scottish National Heritage completed an assessment on blue carbon resources in Scotland. And this was a great piece of work, and it brought together a lot of different research. But one of the highlights from it, for me anyway, was that Scottish sealocks are just incredibly efficient carbon storers, and we've overlooked them for so long. So in terms of our carbon budgets and everything. But more than that, a lot of the material in these sealocks that's stored is of terrestrial origin, and there is this direct link from source to sea, from humans to land to oceans. But on a more global scale, we have large afforestation initiatives going on, like the Bond Challenge and the Billion Tree Campaign that is supported by the UN, and we have large collaborative projects such as the IPCC reports, which are really pushing us all to further understand climate change, the impacts, our influence, and how we can be more resilient. But on a global scale, when I say a sealock to you, you're probably thinking, well, sealocks are only in Scotland. That is not correct, because a sealock and a fjord are the same thing. We happen to call them sealocks, but across the world, they're commonly called fjords. So to get your bearings on this map, it should be quite easy. Scotland is in the middle. I feel like that's what we're all used to seeing. And everything, everywhere in dark blue, has a fjord system. So all those countries spanning the USA, Canada, Scandinavian countries, even a couple in the Southern Hemisphere, but a majority is in the Northern Hemisphere. And a lot of these locations are Arctic locations just now, so are seasonally frozen at least. And we know that a lot of these Arctic locations, as climate change progresses, might end up looking something like Scotland's climate is today, and something like Scotland's landscape might be today. So for us, understanding how our land management can influence coastal carbon storage, and how, specifically where we plant forests, how we plant forests, can affect our carbon storage in our nation, can act as an analogue for several other countries in the future. So this research spans much further than just Scotland. It can apply to several countries, and is really somewhere where we can lead the way in this research for others to follow on as well. So where am I doing my research? I'm focusing on the west coast of Scotland. You'll probably have noticed that the west coast of Scotland is very rugged. There's lots of indentations all the way down there on that map. And almost every single indentation on the west coast of Scotland is actually a sealock. So I've selected 3 of these. I've had lots to choose from, Loch Carron, Loch Steinart and Loch Creran as well. And I've selected these based on their percentage forest cover in their catchment, so how much forestry has already been planted there. Based on the felling activities, so one of my supervisors is at Forest Research, so I have access to when they plan to fell different areas of forest, over the duration of my PhD, and also based on where sediment cores are available, so where people have already went and taken some sediment cores for me to analyse as well. So I work in the catchments a lot, in the source, at the source of the material and in these forest environments. That's a snapshot from Loch Crieran. And I'm really looking at how the forestry upstream and the processes such as felling upstream can affect what gets transported into these vast areas of Sealock here. You can see along the banks of Loch Crieran, even downstream on the banks, there's a lot of forestry all along the edge. So when I go into the field, it's very glamorous. I'm often in waders and a waterproof jacket. And I go and I take water samples from the rivers, and I sample soil from the surrounding riverbanks, and I take vegetation samples and sediment cores where possible. Now with these samples, I take them back to the lab to be processed. And the first thing I like to do is look at the concentration and the speciation of both carbon and iron in these samples. But more than that, I kind of need some more detail. If I want to be able to attribute this carbon and iron to forestry practices, I need to know specifically that that carbon has come from a conifer tree, for example. So I perform lignin analysis and isotopic analysis as well, which enables me to pinpoint exactly where that carbon's come from, whether it's come from a conifer tree or whether it's come from grassland or shrubland or so on. So a quick summary to round it up. My PhD project really is about understanding lateral carbon transport and why it is vital, really, to assess our current and future carbon storage potential. There's a couple of key questions that come out of this project, which is, can our understanding of carbon and iron interactions, of forest practices, of carbon transport actually aid the management of forests and sealocks? And also, how might climate change affect this lateral carbon transport moving forwards? And just to reiterate, this project does connect different carbon pools, but I'm also hoping that it will bridge the gap between scientific research and land management, policy and public communication. The results from this project are not meant to be published in a journal and sit there and only be read by academics. They are going to be prime, essentially, to be implemented in society to help open a conversation with land management and the government about where is best to plant forestry. We're all working towards a common goal, so hopefully this project will be able to facilitate that. I've got my email address down the bottom for you, celeste.kellock@stir.ac.uk, and my Twitter handle is at the bottom as well, which is Celeste the Lion. So please feel free to contact me on either of those mediums if you have any questions now or in the future, or yeah. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Celeste. That was a really interesting talk. I'm sure everybody found it also very interesting. We've got a couple of questions here on the chat.
Okay.
First one from Debbie. She says, apologies if this is a basic question, but in general, do the carbon or iron molecules have to have formed prior to their travel, or do they bind as they travel?
No, that's absolutely not a basic question. It's actually not something that's well known, so it's something I will be investigating through my project, actually. So because I'll be taking samples from different points down the rivers, so essentially if you think of the Sealock, I'll be looking at all the large rivers and small rivers that contribute, and I'll be taking samples from various ones, so I'll be able to see where iron and carbon have been binding throughout. So hopefully I'll be able to give you an answer in the next couple of years to that question.
Well, we'll be on the edge of our seats until then. And another question from Debbie, but I don't know if it's the same Debbie.
Okay.
She says, you've highlighted a couple of key questions that have come out of the project. Have you as yet been able to come to any conclusions yet, or see a trend one way or the other?
That's a good question. I'm in the first year of my PhD, so unfortunately I am not yet in a position to have made any firm conclusions. COVID has put a bit of a barrier in the way of some of my sampling, so over the next few months I'm hoping to get back out and to be able to get some more solid results and conclusions from that. But yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah, it's early days yet, I guess.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I don't see any questions on YouTube, and I think that's it from the Q&A, unless anyone had any last questions. Get them in now or forever hold your peace. Otherwise, thanks very much, Celeste. That was fantastic. Yeah, we look forward to hearing more about that in the future.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Celeste. So just to close, that's it, everyone. A big thank you to everybody who tuned in to listen today. And also a big thank you to MASTS for setting up today's webinar, and our fantastic speakers for sharing your work with us as part of our Climate Week celebrations. We still have loads of events throughout Climate Week, so be sure to check out our Eventbrite page where you can sign up to our latest events, and we hope you can join us. So thanks, everyone.